I've seen hearts stop beating hundreds of times, but I had never seen one come back to life the way Maggie Williams did that night. My name is Isabella Morales, but everyone at Memorial Hermann Hospital calls me Izzy. 7 years working night shifts in the ICU, and I thought I had become immune to everything this place could throw at me. The constant hum of ventilators, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell that clings to your scrubs long after you get home. It had all become my second nature. But that Tuesday night in October, something felt different from the moment I walked through those automatic doors at 11:15. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer somehow, casting longer shadows in the hallways. Even Carmen Valdez, my usual partner for the night shift, looked up from her charts with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rough evening?" I asked, tying my hair back and reaching for my stethoscope. Carmen just shook her head slowly. "Room 314 is going to be challenging tonight, Izzy. The family, they're not ready." I had learned to read between the lines in this job. When Carmen said a family wasn't ready, it meant we were probably going to lose someone before sunrise. It meant holding hands in hallways, making difficult phone calls, and watching love collide with the harsh reality of medicine. The ICU on night shifts has its own rhythm. During the day, there's constant movement, doctors making rounds, specialists consulting, families rotating in and out during visiting hours. But at night, everything slows down to just the essential sounds. Machines breathing for people who can't, hearts beating on borrowed time, and the soft footsteps of nurses moving between rooms like guardians in the darkness. I've always been good at compartmentalizing. You have to be, in this job. Each room holds a story, sometimes of recovery, sometimes of goodbye, but you learn to focus on what needs to be done in the moment. Check vitals, adjust medications, monitor changes, document everything. It's a dance you perfect over time, moving efficiently from one patient to the next. That night, I started my rounds in room 301. Mrs. Chen, recovering from a minor stroke, sleeping peacefully with her oxygen levels stable. Room 302 held Mr. Rodriguez, a construction worker who'd had a heart attack on the job site 3 days earlier. He was improving steadily, and his wife had left a note thanking the nursing staff, written in careful Spanish and English. But as I approached room 314, something in the air changed. There was a weight to it, like the moments before a thunderstorm, when you can feel the electricity building. Through the partially open door, I could see the soft glow of the monitors and hear the low murmur of voices. Dr. Anthony Patel emerged from the room just as I arrived. He's one of the best cardiologists in Houston, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a way of explaining complex medical situations that somehow makes families feel heard, even when the news isn't good. But tonight, his usually composed expression carried something heavier. "Izzy," he said quietly, pulling me aside. "Mrs. Williams has been declining steadily since this afternoon. 72 years old, severe congestive heart failure complicated by arrhythmias. Her ejection fraction is down to 15%. I nodded, understanding the gravity immediately. A normal heart pumps out about 60% of its blood with each beat. 15% meant her heart was barely functioning, struggling to keep her body alive. "The family?" I asked. "Her daughter Amanda has been here since yesterday morning. The son-in-law Kevin is trying to hold everyone together, and their 16-year-old daughter Grace keeps asking questions no one knows how to answer." Dr. Patel paused, looking back toward the room. "They're taking shifts holding her hand. Someone's been with her every moment. I've seen this before. Families who refuse to accept what the monitors are telling us, who believe that love alone can pull someone back from the edge. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it makes our job harder when we need to help them understand that letting go is also an act of love." "What's the plan?" I asked. "We're keeping her comfortable. Pain management, monitoring for any changes. But honestly, Izzy, I don't expect her to see morning." As I stepped into room 314 for the first time that night, I was struck by how the medical equipment seemed to fade into the background. The usual intimidating array of machines and wires became secondary to the human drama unfolding at the bedside. Maggie Williams lay small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, her gray hair spread across the pillow like silver threads. Despite the oxygen cannula and the IV lines, there was something dignified about her presence, as if even in this vulnerable state, she maintained an inner strength. Beside her sat Amanda, a woman in her mid-40s with her mother's bone structure and tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Her hand rested gently on her mother's arm, and I noticed she was wearing a simple gold wedding ring that caught the light from the monitors. The room smelled faintly of the lavender hand lotion someone had brought from home, a small attempt to make this sterile environment feel more personal, more like the place where someone's mother, grandmother, and friend was fighting for her life. But I had no idea that everything I thought I understood about life, death, and the space between them was about to change forever. The first thing you notice about families in crisis is how they organize themselves around hope. Amanda had clearly become the anchor, the one making decisions and fielding calls from relatives across the country. Kevin stood by the window, occasionally stepping out to take hushed phone conversations with what I assumed were work colleagues, trying to manage life outside these walls while his world focused on this one room. Grace, their 16-year-old daughter, sat curled in the corner chair, her grandmother's favorite quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Every few minutes she would look up from her phone, not scrolling through social media like most teenagers, but staring at the screen as if it might deliver some miracle cure she could research and present to the doctors. "How long has she been like this?" I asked Amanda softly, checking Maggie's pulse while trying not to disturb the delicate positioning of her mother's hand in hers. 3 days since she collapsed at home," Amanda whispered back. "But she's been getting weaker for months. Mom's always been stubborn about doctors, you know? She kept saying she was just tired, that she needed more vitamins." A sad smile crossed her face. "She's been taking care of everyone else for so long. I think she forgot how to let people take care of her." I nodded, making notes on my tablet while observing Maggie's shallow breathing pattern. Her oxygen saturation was hovering around 88%, despite the supplemental oxygen. Not critically dangerous yet, but concerning. Her heart rate displayed an irregular rhythm on the monitor, occasionally skipping beats in a way that made the machine emit soft warning chimes. "She raised me by herself after my father left when I was 12, Amanda continued, as if talking about her mother's strength might somehow transfer it to the frail woman in the bed. "Worked 2 jobs, never missed a school event, somehow managed to save enough to help me through college. When Grace was born, Mom said it was like getting a second chance at motherhood, but this time she got to be the fun one." Grace looked up at the mention of her name. "Grandma Maggie always said I was her favorite granddaughter," she said with a watery smile. "You're her only granddaughter," Kevin pointed out gently. "That's what made it so special," Grace replied, and despite everything, Amanda actually laughed. These were the moments that made night shifts in the ICU both beautiful and heartbreaking. Families sharing memories like offerings, as if the stories themselves could serve as medicine. I've learned that sometimes the best thing a nurse can do is simply bear witness to these conversations, to let people know that their loved one's life has been seen and acknowledged. Around midnight, Dr. Patel returned to check on Maggie's condition. I watched him study the latest readouts, his expression growing more serious as he reviewed the trends from the past few hours. Her blood pressure had dropped from 120/70 to 90/50. Her heart rate had become increasingly erratic, and the small amounts of fluid we'd been giving her weren't making the improvement we hoped for. "Amanda, could I speak with you outside for a moment?" Dr. Patel asked. I saw the fear flash across Amanda's face, that look every family member dreads, the one that says the conversation you've been avoiding is about to happen. Kevin immediately moved to her side, and together they followed the doctor into the hallway. Grace and I were left alone with Maggie. The teenager looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than 16. "She's not going to get better, is she?" I sat down in the chair Amanda had vacated, choosing my words carefully. "Your grandmother is very sick, Grace. Her heart is having trouble doing its job. But people recover from heart problems all the time, right? I've been reading about it online. There are surgeries, medications, things they can do. Sometimes, yes, but your grandmother's heart has been working hard for many years, and sometimes even the strongest hearts get tired." Grace nodded slowly, processing this information with a maturity that broke my heart. She told me once that she wasn't afraid of dying, because she'd lived long enough to see me grow up into someone she was proud of. I didn't really understand what she meant then. What do you think she meant now? I think she meant that love doesn't end when someone's body stops working, that the important parts of people stay with you. Grace reached over and gently touched her grandmother's hand. "Is that silly?" "No, Grace. I think that's one of the wisest things anyone has ever said to me." In the hallway, I could see Dr. Patel's gentle but serious conversation with Amanda and Kevin. Amanda's hand covered her mouth, Kevin's arm around her shoulders, both of them nodding as they received information that would reshape their understanding of the next few hours. When they returned to the room, Amanda's eyes were red, but determined. "The doctor says we should call the rest of the family," she announced quietly. "Uncle Richard is driving down from Dallas, and Aunt Susan is trying to get a flight from Denver." "What did he tell you?" Grace asked. Amanda sat back down beside her mother, taking that familiar position with Maggie's hand in hers. "He said her heart is getting weaker, and that we should prepare ourselves. He said she's not in pain, and that we should just be with her." The weight of that phrase, "be with her," settled over the room like a blanket. It meant no more interventions, no more attempts to fix what couldn't be fixed. It meant transitioning from fighting for recovery to simply creating space for whatever came next. Around 1:30 in the morning, something shifted in Maggie's breathing pattern. The pauses between breaths grew longer, and her oxygen saturation began to drop despite our best efforts. The monitors started chiming more frequently, creating a soundtrack of increasing urgency that made everyone in the room tense. Carmen appeared in the doorway. "Izzy, do you need anything?" I glanced at the family. Amanda holding her mother's hand, Kevin with his arm around Grace, all of them focused entirely on Maggie's face as if they could will her to keep breathing through sheer concentration. "We're okay for now," I told Carmen. "Just keep an eye on us." Carmen nodded knowingly. She'd been doing this job even longer than I had, and she understood the delicate balance of providing medical care while also protecting a family's final moments together. By 2:15 in the morning, Maggie's heart rate had dropped to the 40s, and her breathing had become increasingly labored. Dr. Patel quietly adjusted her medication to ensure she remained comfortable, but we all understood that we were now simply managing her transition, not trying to reverse it. "Should we say something to her?" Grace whispered. "Like, should we tell her it's okay to let go?" Amanda looked at me questioningly. "This is one of the hardest parts of my job, helping families navigate these final conversations when there are no protocols for matters of the heart. Talk to her the way you always have," I suggested. "Tell her what's in your heart. Many people believe that hearing is the last sense to fade, so she might be able to hear you even if she can't respond." Amanda leaned closer to her mother's ear. "Mom, we're all here with you. Grace is here, and Kevin, and I'm holding your hand just like you held mine when I was scared. You don't have to fight anymore if you're tired. We're going to be okay." Grace moved to the other side of the bed. "I love you, Grandma Maggie. Thank you for teaching me how to make your chocolate chip cookies, and for always letting me stay up late when I slept over, and for showing me that being strong doesn't mean you never cry. Kevin." This man who had married into the family but had been claimed by Maggie as fully as any biological son, simply said, "Thank you for raising the woman I fell in love with, and for loving Grace the way every child deserves to be loved." The room grew quiet, except for the soft sounds of the medical equipment and Maggie's increasingly shallow breathing. Outside, Houston slept on, unaware that in room 314 of Memorial Hermann Hospital, a family was saying goodbye to the woman who had been their cornerstone. But none of us were prepared for what was about to happen next. At 2:45 in the morning, Maggie's heart monitor began showing a pattern I'd seen too many times before. The irregular rhythm that had been concerning but manageable was deteriorating into something much more dangerous. Her heart rate dropped to 38 beats per minute, then 35, each beat growing weaker and more sporadic. I moved closer to check her pulse manually, my fingers finding the faint flutter at her wrist that confirmed what the machines were telling us. Her skin felt cool and clammy, and when I lifted her eyelid to check her pupil response, the reaction was sluggish and delayed. "What's happening?" Amanda asked, noticing my increased attention to the monitors. "Her heart is having more difficulty maintaining its rhythm," I explained gently. "This is part of the process we discussed with Dr. Patel." But even as I said it, something felt different about this particular decline. In 7 years of night shifts, I developed an intuition about these transitions, a sense of when someone was fighting and when they were letting go. Usually there's a visible relaxation, a settling that happens when the body stops struggling. But Maggie seemed restless somehow, as if she was wrestling with something we couldn't see. Around 3 o'clock, her breathing became increasingly labored. The pauses between breaths stretched longer, 5 seconds, then 8, then 12, each time making us hold our own breath until we heard her next inhale. Grace counted silently on her fingers, and I could see the panic building in her eyes every time the silence extended. "Is she suffering?" Kevin asked quietly. I checked her facial expression, looking for signs of distress. "No, she appears comfortable." Sometimes the breathing pattern changes like this as the body's systems begin to slow down. Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway, making his rounds to check on our most critical patients. He observed Maggie's condition for several minutes, reviewing her vitals and assessing her overall status. When he pulled me aside, his expression was grave. "Her blood pressure is down to 70/40, he whispered. "Heart rate in the low 30s and dropping. Based on her current trajectory, I'd estimate we're looking at the next hour or two at most." I nodded, though something in my chest tightened. There's always a part of me that hopes the doctors are wrong, that the human body will surprise us with its resilience. But the numbers don't lie, and Maggie's numbers were painting a clear picture of a heart that was simply too tired to continue. When I returned to the bedside, I noticed Amanda had begun talking to her mother in a continuous, gentle stream of conversation. She was sharing memories, updating her on family news, telling her about Grace's college plans, as if maintaining this connection through words could somehow anchor her mother to life. "Remember when Grace was 3, and she decided she wanted to marry you instead of finding a prince?" Amanda was saying. "She told everyone at preschool that Grandma Maggie was the most beautiful woman in the world, and that she was going to live in your house forever and help you bake cookies every day." Grace managed a tearful smile. "I still think you're the most beautiful woman in the world, Grandma." Around 3:15, Maggie's oxygen saturation dropped to 78% despite the maximum flow we could safely provide. Her lips began to show a subtle blue tinge, cyanosis, indicating that her body wasn't getting enough oxygen. I quietly increased her comfort medications and made a note in her chart. The family had fallen into their own rhythm of vigil. Amanda maintained her post holding her mother's hand, occasionally leaning forward to whisper something private. Kevin moved between supporting his wife and daughter, bringing water, adjusting Grace's quilt, making quiet phone calls to update relatives who were traveling through the night to say goodbye. Grace had begun reading aloud from a worn paperback novel, something about a woman who travels back in time to save her true love. Grandma always said she loved romance novels because they proved that love could overcome anything, she explained, when she noticed me listening. She said the best stories were about people who never gave up on each other. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Here was this family, refusing to give up on Maggie even as her body was systematically shutting down. Their love was fierce and present and unwavering, but it couldn't repair a heart that had simply worn out after 72 years of faithful service. By 3:25, the changes were becoming more pronounced. Maggie's breathing had developed what we call Cheney-Stokes respirations, periods of increasingly deep breaths, followed by periods of very shallow breathing, then brief periods where breathing stops altogether. It's a neurological response that happens when the brain's respiratory centers begin to fail. "Why does her breathing sound different?" Grace asked. "Her body is working very hard right now," I explained. "Different parts of her system are beginning to slow down, including the part of her brain that controls breathing automatically." Amanda squeezed her mother's hand tighter. "Mom, if you can hear me, I need you to know that you did everything right. You were the best mother, the best grandmother. You taught us how to love people completely, how to show up for each other, how to find joy even when things were hard." The monitors were painting an increasingly stark picture. Maggie's heart rate had dropped to 28 beats per minute, and the rhythm was becoming more erratic with each passing minute. Her blood pressure had fallen to levels that meant her organs weren't receiving adequate circulation. I had seen this exact scenario dozens of times before. The vital signs, the breathing pattern, the family's desperate hope colliding with medical reality, it always followed the same trajectory. Usually, by this point, I would be preparing the family for the final moments, explaining what they might expect to see and hear, helping them understand that despite the dramatic changes happening in her body, Maggie wasn't in distress. But something nagged at me as I watched her face. There was a tension around her eyes, a slight furrowing of her brow that suggested some kind of internal struggle. Most people, when they reach this stage, display a peaceful expression, as if they're simply drifting away. Maggie looked like she was fighting something. At 3:27 precisely, I remember because I was documenting her vitals, several alarms began sounding simultaneously. Her heart rate dropped to 24, her oxygen saturation plummeted to 65%, and her blood pressure reading became so low that the monitor couldn't calculate it accurately. Amanda stood up abruptly, still clutching her mother's hand. What's happening? Is this—" Before I could respond, Maggie's heart rhythm on the monitor shifted into something I'd only seen a few times in my career, a pattern so irregular and weak that it barely qualified as a heartbeat at all. The spaces between the peaks on the screen grew wider and wider, the electronic blips becoming fainter with each cycle. Grace dropped her book and moved to her grandmother's other side. Kevin stepped closer, his hand finding Amanda's shoulder. The three of them formed a protective circle around Maggie, their faces reflecting the terrible understanding that this was the moment they had been dreading. "Should we call Dr. Patel?" Amanda whispered. "He's aware," I said softly. "This is what we expected might happen." The room grew quiet, except for the increasingly urgent sounds from the medical equipment. Maggie's breathing had become so shallow that I had to watch carefully to detect the slight rise and fall of her chest. Her heart rate continued dropping. 22, 20, 18. Each number representing another step away from the life this family wasn't ready to lose. And then, at exactly 3:28 in the morning, her heart monitor showed something that made my breath catch in my throat. The rhythm that had been growing progressively weaker and more irregular suddenly stopped. The screen displayed a straight line where her heartbeat should have been, accompanied by the long, steady tone that every healthcare worker knows means only one thing. Amanda gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. Grace began crying silently, her tears falling onto her grandmother's blanket. Kevin closed his eyes and bowed his head, his lips moving in what looked like a prayer. I reached for the alarm button to silence the monitors, preparing to give the family these final moments in peace. In my mind, I was already calculating the time of passing, thinking about the gentle procedures that would follow, the calls that would need to be made. But as my finger moved toward that button, something impossible happened that would change everything I thought I knew about life and the mysterious space where it meets the unknown. The flatline tone had been sounding for exactly 43 seconds when I saw it, a tiny flutter on the heart monitor, so small I thought it might be electrical interference from another machine. But then it happened again, and again. I froze, my finger still hovering over the alarm button, staring at the screen with the kind of disbelief that makes you question your own eyes. After 7 years in the ICU, I knew what death looked like on these monitors. I knew the difference between a true cardiac event and equipment malfunction. This was neither. Amanda was still holding her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything." Grace had buried her face against her grandmother's shoulder, her quiet sobs barely audible over the monitor's alarm. Kevin stood with his head bowed, one hand on his wife's back, the other gently touching Maggie's forehead. None of them had noticed what I was seeing on the screen. The flutter became a blip. The blip became a weak but unmistakable heartbeat. 24 beats per minute, then 28, then 32. I watched in stunned silence as Maggie's heart rate climbed back into numbers that weren't just compatible with life. They were approaching normal for someone in her condition. My medical training kicked in even as my mind struggled to process what was happening. I quickly checked her pulse manually, pressing my fingers against her wrist where moments before I'd felt only the faintest flutter. There it was, weak but steady, matching the rhythm on the monitor. "Oh my God," I whispered, so quietly that the family couldn't hear me over their grief. But something even more extraordinary was happening. Maggie's oxygen saturation, which had dropped to a critical 65%, began climbing. 68, 71, 75. Her blood pressure, which the machine hadn't been able to calculate because it was so low, suddenly registered. 85 over 55. Still low, but within a range that could sustain life. I should have called Dr. Patel immediately. I should have started documenting these impossible vital signs, should have begun checking for explanations. Equipment failure, medication error, some medical phenomenon I'd missed in school. But I couldn't move. I could only stand there and watch as a woman who had been clinically gone for nearly a minute continued to return to life. And then Maggie's eyes opened. Not the reflexive, unseeing opening that sometimes happens in the final moments. Her eyes opened with purpose, with awareness, with a clarity that made the hair on my arms stand up. She blinked slowly, as if adjusting to the light, and then turned her head slightly to look directly at Amanda. Amanda was still crying, still whispering her goodbyes, completely unaware that her mother was looking at her with fully conscious, loving eyes. "Amanda," Maggie said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from the oxygen tube and weak from everything her body had just been through. But it was clear, it was intentional, and it was impossible. Amanda's head snapped up so fast I thought she might hurt her neck. "Mom!" The word came out as a gasp, filled with so much hope and disbelief that it made my chest tight. Grace lifted her head from her grandmother's shoulder, her eyes wide and red from crying. Kevin took a step back, his mouth falling open as he tried to process what he was seeing. "I'm here, baby," Maggie continued, her voice growing slightly stronger. "I'm still here." The monitors were now showing vital signs that, while not perfect, were stable. Heart rate holding steady in the low 40s, slow but not dangerously so. Oxygen saturation at 78%, low but adequate. Blood pressure maintaining at levels that could support consciousness. "Mom, we thought you were—" Amanda couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Maggie said, and incredibly, she squeezed Amanda's hand. The same hand that had been limp and unresponsive moments before was now capable of deliberate, loving contact. "I could hear you talking to me. All of you. I heard every word." Grace leaned forward, her voice shaking. "Grandma Maggie, are you really okay?" Maggie turned to look at her granddaughter, and when she smiled, actually smiled, I felt tears start in my own eyes. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm tired, but I'm okay." Dr. Patel chose that moment to appear in the doorway for his routine check, and I watched his face cycle through the same disbelief I was experiencing. He looked at the monitors, looked at Maggie sitting up slightly and talking to her family, looked at me with an expression that asked if I had any explanation for what we were witnessing. I shook my head almost imperceptibly. I had nothing. He approached the bed slowly, pulling out his stethoscope. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Dr. Patel. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Maggie said with a weak laugh. "But I can feel my heart beating strong again. It feels different, better." Dr. Patel listened to her heart, checked her pulse, examined her eyes with his penlight. I could see him mentally running through every possible medical explanation, just as I had been doing. Equipment malfunction didn't explain conscious conversation. Medication error didn't account for this dramatic reversal. There was no protocol for what we were observing. "Your vital signs were—" he began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to explain what had just happened. "They were saying goodbye," Maggie said softly. "I know. I heard them. I felt myself slipping away, and I wanted to let go because I was so tired. But then I heard Amanda telling me all those things about being a good mother, and Grace reading to me from that romance novel, and Kevin thanking me for raising Amanda right." She paused, taking a slightly deeper breath than she'd managed all evening. I realized I wasn't finished yet. I realized there were things I still needed to say, and I couldn't leave without saying them. The room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors that were now displaying readings nobody had expected to see again. Maggie looked at each member of her family with eyes that were fully present, fully aware. "Amanda, you are the strongest woman I know, and the best mother Grace could have asked for. Kevin, you've been more of a son to me than I ever hoped for when Amanda brought you home." And she turned to Grace. "And you, my darling girl, you're going to do amazing things in this world. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't." Dr. Patel was writing notes furiously, documenting the impossible. I was still standing there with my finger near the alarm button that I no longer needed to push, watching a medical miracle unfold in real time. "But how?" Amanda asked. "The doctors said, we thought you were—" "I don't know how," Maggie admitted. "I just know that sometimes love is stronger than everything else, including the things that medical books say should be impossible." As she spoke those words, I felt something shift in my understanding of what I did for a living, and what I thought I knew about the mysteries that lived in the space between science and faith. I had to step back from the bed and lean against the wall for a moment, my legs suddenly feeling unsteady. In 7 years of nursing, I'd developed what I thought was an unshakable foundation of medical knowledge. I understood cardiac rhythms, respiratory patterns, the physiology of dying. I could predict with reasonable accuracy how these situations would unfold based on vital signs and clinical presentation. Everything I thought I knew had just been turned upside down in the space of 3 minutes. Dr. Patel was conducting a more thorough examination, his movements careful and deliberate as he tried to make sense of what we were all witnessing. He checked Maggie's reflexes, tested her grip strength, Listen to her lungs and heart with the concentration of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Mrs. Williams, I need to run some tests," he said finally. "Blood work, an EKG, maybe an echocardiogram to see how your heart is functioning now." "What just happened?" "It's not something I can easily explain with current medical understanding." "I don't need you to explain it, doctor," Maggie replied with a small smile. "I just need you to take good care of my family when I'm not here to do it myself." "Mom, don't talk like that," Amanda protested, but her voice carried a different quality now. Less desperation, more protective concern. You came back. You're here." "I am here," Maggie agreed. "But honey, we both know this isn't a cure. My heart is still sick. What happened tonight? It was a gift. Time for us to say the things we needed to say properly." The wisdom in her words hit me like a physical force. She understood something that her family was still processing, that miracles don't always come in the form of complete healing. Sometimes they come as moments of grace, opportunities to experience love and connection that might otherwise be missed. Carmen appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unusual level of activity in room 314. When she saw Maggie sitting up and talking, her eyes went wide. She looked at me with an expression that clearly asked, "What the hell is happening here?" I walked over to her, speaking quietly. She flatlined for almost a minute, Carmen. Complete cardiac arrest. And then, she just came back. Carmen looked from me to the monitors, processing the impossible data they were displaying. She'd been doing this job for 12 years, longer than I had, and I could see her cycling through the same mental checklist of possible explanations that I'd already exhausted. "Equipment malfunction?" she whispered. I checked, multiple times. Everything's working perfectly. "Medication error?" "No changes to her drugs in the past 4 hours," Dr. Patel confirmed. Carmen stared at Maggie, who was now holding Grace's face in her hands and wiping away her granddaughter's tears with gentle thumbs. "Then what?" "I have no idea," I admitted, "and neither does anyone else." Dr. Patel finished his examination and pulled me aside. His usual composure was fractured, replaced by the kind of professional uncertainty that doctors hate to acknowledge. "Izzy, I've been practicing cardiology for 15 years. I've seen spontaneous recovery from cardiac events, but never from complete electrical standstill. Never from the kind of multi-system failure Mrs. Williams was experiencing." "What are you going to put in her chart?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. The truth, that her vital signs indicated clinical death for approximately 55 seconds, followed by spontaneous return of cardiac function with restoration of consciousness and cognitive ability. Let the medical reviewers make sense of it. We both looked back at the family, who had drawn their chairs closer to Maggie's bed and were engaged in the kind of intimate conversation that families have when they've been given an unexpected gift of time. Amanda was showing her mother photos on her phone, recent pictures of Grace's school activities, family gatherings, moments from daily life that had accumulated since Maggie's health began declining. "Look at this one," Amanda was saying, holding up a photo of Grace in her homecoming dress. "She insisted on getting ready at your house because she said your mirror had better lighting." "You looked beautiful, sweetheart," Maggie told Grace, "just like your mother did at that age." Grace leaned against her grandmother's shoulder. "I kept your corsage from when you went to prom with Grandpa Joe. I wore it that night because I wanted you there with me." "I was there with you," Maggie said softly. "I'm always with you, even when you can't see me." Kevin had been quietly observing this exchange, and I noticed tears in his eyes. This man who had been the strong anchor for his family was finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what they had almost lost and what they had impossibly regained. Around 4:15 in the morning, Maggie's vitals had stabilized at levels that, while not perfect, were sustainable. Her heart rate held steady in the mid-40s, her oxygen saturation remained around 79%, and her blood pressure maintained at 90/60. Not normal, but compatible with consciousness and conversation. "How long do you think?" Amanda began, then stopped herself. "How long do I have?" Maggie finished gently. "I don't know, baby, but I know it's longer than it was an hour ago, and that feels like a miracle to me." Dr. Patel returned with the results of the blood work he'd ordered. "Your cardiac enzymes are elevated, which we expected given what your heart went through tonight. But your other levels are actually better than they were yesterday. Your kidney function has improved, and your electrolytes are more balanced. It was as if her brief journey to the edge of death had somehow reset her body's systems, giving them a chance to find equilibrium again. None of it made medical sense, but the evidence was right there in the lab results. "What does that mean?" Grace asked. "It means your grandmother's body is working better now than it was before tonight's episode," Dr. Patel explained. "How much better, and for how long, I can't predict. But it's encouraging." As dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, casting the first pale light into room 314, something had fundamentally changed in all of us. The family had received an unexpected reprieve from grief, a chance to experience hope when they had been preparing for loss. Dr. Patel had witnessed something that would challenge his understanding of cardiac medicine for the rest of his career, and I had learned that 7 years of experience meant nothing when faced with the inexplicable intersection of love, faith, and the human spirit's refusal to surrender. Around 5:30, Uncle Richard arrived from Dallas, bursting through the door with the frantic energy of someone who had driven through the night, expecting to say goodbye to his sister. When he saw Maggie sitting up and talking, he literally stumbled backward against the doorframe. "Maggie?" But Amanda called and said, "I know what Amanda said," Maggie replied, with a laugh that sounded almost like her old self. "And she was right. But apparently, I wasn't finished being your annoying little sister yet." Richard approached the bed cautiously, as if sudden movement might break whatever spell was keeping his sister alive and conscious. When he took her hand and felt her squeeze back with genuine strength, his composure crumbled completely. "We thought we lost you," he whispered. "You did lose me for a minute," Maggie said matter-of-factly, "but something brought me back." Something that felt bigger than medicine, bigger than what any of us understand. As I watched this reunion, this impossible extension of family time that should never have happened, I realized I was witnessing something that would change, not just how I approached my job, but how I understood the very nature of life and the mysterious forces that sometimes intervene when love refuses to let go. The sun was fully up now, casting warm light across a room that had been touched by something extraordinary, and none of us would ever be quite the same. 3 months later, I still think about that night every time I walk into the ICU. The automatic doors slide open with the same soft whoosh. The fluorescent lights cast the same clinical glow, and the familiar symphony of monitors and ventilators fills the air just as it always has. But everything feels different now, because I know something I didn't know before, that the space between life and death is far more mysterious and permeable than any medical textbook will tell you. Maggie Williams lived for 6 more weeks after that impossible night in room 314. 6 weeks of breakfast with her family, 6 weeks of Grace reading romance novels aloud in the afternoons, 6 weeks of teaching her granddaughter the secret to her chocolate chip cookies that she'd never shared with anyone else. She attended Grace's school play, saw Amanda get a promotion at work, and even danced one slow song with Kevin at their anniversary dinner. When her heart finally stopped for the last time, it was peaceful and expected, surrounded by the same love that had somehow called her back from clinical death that October night. But those 6 weeks, those were pure gift. Time that shouldn't have existed according to every medical prediction we'd made. Dr. Patel presented Maggie's case at a cardiology conference in Dallas 2 months after she passed away. He stood in front of 200 of the most experienced heart specialists in Texas and told them about a 72-year-old woman who had flatlined for 55 seconds and then returned to consciousness with improved cardiac function. The room buzzed with questions he couldn't answer, theories that didn't quite fit, and the kind of scientific skepticism that demands explanations for everything. But he ended his presentation with something I'll never forget. Sometimes, our role as physicians isn't to understand everything we witness. Sometimes our role is simply to bear witness to the mysteries that exist beyond our current knowledge, and to remain humble in the face of forces we can't measure or predict. I think about those words every time I enter a patient's room now. I still check vitals, monitor changes, document everything with the same professional thoroughness I've always maintained. But I also watch for the intangible things, the way families hold each other, the power of spoken love, the determination in someone's eyes when they're not ready to let go. Last week, I had a patient in room 308, a 45-year-old construction worker named Miguel Santos, who had suffered a massive heart attack on a job site in downtown Houston. His wife Rosa hadn't left his bedside for 3 days, talking to him in a mixture of Spanish and English, playing his favorite conjunto music softly on her phone, massaging his hands while the machines kept him alive. On Thursday night, Miguel's condition deteriorated rapidly. His heart rhythm became increasingly erratic, his blood pressure dropped to dangerous levels, and his oxygen saturation began to decline despite maximum support. I called Dr. Chen, who came in to evaluate, and gently explained to Rosa that Miguel's heart was failing, and that we should prepare for the possibility that he might not recover. Rosa listened quietly, nodded with dignity, and then turned back to her husband. "Miguel," she said firmly, "you listen to me. Our daughter Sophia is getting married in 2 months, and you promised to walk her down the aisle. You don't break promises to your daughters, understand? So you fight, mi amor. You fight because love is stronger than everything else." I felt chills run down my spine as I heard those words, an echo of what Maggie had said about love being stronger than medical impossibilities. And while Miguel didn't experience the dramatic reversal that Maggie had, something did shift that night. His vitals stabilized, his heart rhythm improved, and by morning he was awake and asking for coffee. He's still in recovery, still has a long road ahead of him, but he's going to make it. He's going to walk his daughter down that aisle because Rosa refused to let him go, and because sometimes the human heart responds to things that can't be measured in medical units. I've started paying attention to the families differently now. I watch for the ones who refuse to give up, who speak to their loved ones as if they can hear every word, who fill hospital rooms with photos and familiar scents, and the kind of love that creates its own atmosphere. Those are the rooms where unexpected things happen, where medical predictions sometimes prove incomplete. Carmen and I often work together still, and we've developed a kind of shorthand about these cases. We call them Maggie moments. Those times when something inexplicable happens that reminds us there's more to healing than what we learned in nursing school. We've seen it 3 times since that October night. Small miracles, recoveries that surprised everyone, moments when love seemed to tip the scales in favor of life. The other nurses have started to notice too. Word spreads in a hospital, especially about cases that don't fit the usual patterns. There's a different energy in the ICU now, a quiet openness to possibilities that weren't there before. We still follow protocols, still provide excellent medical care, but we also make space for the mysterious forces that sometimes show up when people love each other fiercely enough to call someone back from the edge. Grace Williams stopped by the hospital last month to volunteer in the pediatric wing. She's 17 now, a senior in high school with plans to study nursing in college. She wants to specialize in pediatric oncology because, she told me, Grandma Maggie taught me that miracles don't always look like complete healing. Sometimes they look like extra time, or less pain, or families getting to say the things they need to say. When she said that, I understood something I'd been trying to articulate since that night in room 314. Miracles aren't always about defying medical reality. Sometimes they're about creating space for love to do what love does, connect us, heal us in ways that go beyond physical restoration, and remind us that the most important things in life can't be measured by machines. Amanda sent me a card on the anniversary of that night. Inside, she had written, "Thank you for witnessing Mom's miracle with such grace, and for helping us understand that some moments are too sacred for medical explanations. Those 6 extra weeks changed our family forever." She was right about those weeks changing everything. Grace learned her grandmother's cookie recipe, but more importantly, she learned about resilience and the power of refusing to give up on people you love. Amanda discovered that her mother's approval and pride in her had been complete all along, not something she still needed to earn. Kevin received a blessing from the woman who had raised his wife, a benediction that strengthened their marriage in ways they're still discovering. And I learned that 7 years of experience in the ICU had taught me to read monitors and manage medical crises, but it hadn't prepared me for the night when love proved to be a more powerful force than cardiac arrest. I still don't have a medical explanation for what happened to Maggie Williams on that October night. The case remains an anomaly in her medical records, a footnote that some future researcher might study while trying to understand the intersection of consciousness, cardiac function, and the will to live. But I've stopped needing a scientific explanation. What I know is this: I watched a family love someone back to life, even if only temporarily. I witnessed the moment when human connection proved stronger than clinical death. I saw grace manifest in room 314 of Memorial Hermann Hospital, and it changed everything about how I understand my role as a healer. Every night when I start my shift now, I carry that understanding with me. I enter each room knowing that I'm not just monitoring vital signs and administering medications. I'm bearing witness to the most profound moments in people's lives, creating space for miracles both large and small, and honoring the mysterious forces that sometimes intervene when love refuses to let go. That's what Maggie Williams taught me during the most unforgettable night shift of my career. That medicine is powerful, but love is stronger. That science can explain many things, but not everything. And that sometimes, the most important healing happens in the spaces between heartbeats, in the moments when families gather around hospital beds and speak the words that call people back to life. Have you ever witnessed a moment when everything seemed lost, but something unexplainable happened? I'd love to hear your story, because I've learned that these miracles are happening all around us. We just have to be open enough to recognize them when they occur.